Previously on JSpeaks. What I found as a consultant is small business owners, we're so on fire for that thing we want to do. And I was like, yeah, you're on fire, your clients aren't. Or you're on fire to fulfill this entire thing, but you're exhausted, which means that next client isn't getting your best. So how can I help you build a branded system? How can I help you strategize and get operations in there to make sure that every single time you do your thing, every single time there's a transaction, every single person gets that exact same experience or better. And so that's one of those challenges of growing a small business, right? Is like, when do you leave fulfillment? When do you let some things go? When do you start building systems? And that's where having a really solid brand concept comes in, because all of that is the brand journey. It's not just the colors and the logo and the graphics. It's the memory that people have after you're done. It's what they remember, 5 years from now. It's the story that they're going to tell about their experience that they had with you and why somebody should or should not use your service.
Check out today the secrets to building a loyal customer base. Sybil Stewart talks brand strategy and repositioning.
Focus has been from the beginning and continues to be how do communities support children who have an incarcerated or returning parent. So thinking about children whose parents were arrested, maybe went to jail as a result of that, possibly onto prison, and then are being released. And that can mean coming back to live with the child, living somewhere else temporarily, and then going to live with the child. So thinking about how communities can offer support to kids around that. This was not an intended career path. I wasn't like a fourth grader who woke up and said, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a teacher, or I want to be. This actually just came about through some amazing opportunities through my career where I was able to work with crime victims and really learn that there's another part of the conversation that we oftentimes don't think about, that kids feel the impacts and suffer the consequences of actions that are not their own, that the adults commit, but that sometimes they get overlooked in the conversation. And so I have been able to just build on past experiences in this role with our Children's Place.
Hello everyone. For those of you who are new to my channel, welcome. And for those of you who subscribe to JSpeaks, thank you so much and welcome back. As you know, it is my mission, it is my passion to bring to you all conversation topics that are positive, motivational, educational, and informational. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to be here with Melissa Radcliffe, Program Director for Our Children's Place of Coastal Horizons. 1 in every 28 children in the United States has an incarcerated parent. More than 20,000 children in North Carolina have a parent in prison. And according to the Cassie Foundation, an estimated 160,000 children in North Carolina have experienced parental incarceration and the resulting consequences. Our Children's Place of Coastal Horizons is a statewide program that is committed to the well-being of these children through education, advocacy, and outreach. Their mission is threefold. Number 1, to educate professionals on the impacts of parental incarceration on children and to emphasize the urgency to act. Number 2, to promote and identify programs, policies, and practices that improve outcomes for children of incarcerated parents. And number 3, to support the relationship between these children and their parents, not only to benefit these children, but also to ensure that correction systems, agencies that support families, and surrounding communities understand how to best facilitate these interactions in order to provide the most value. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, relax, and most importantly, listen. And hopefully after today's episode, you understand for yourself that parental incarceration is a significant adverse childhood experience that often coincides with parental divorce, economic instability in the household, and substance abuse. And now it is up to you and I to spread awareness for these children through education, advocacy, and outreach. So Melissa, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's so great to see you in person.
I agree. Not just a voice on the phone or a little box on the screen. So
Yes.
yeah.
How's your day so far?
It's been great. And yours?
It's been great. It's been eventful. I've been here for 3 hours trying to put up this whole entire set. I think it looks beautiful and comfortable. I hope you're comfortable.
Yeah. You did a great job. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Myself and James, our videographer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great to see you. But before we officially get started,
Yeah.
please, as a reminder to me, especially for our audience, please introduce yourself. Who is Melissa Radcliffe?
Yeah.
Talk about how you came to find out about Our Children's Place of Coastal Horizons, what led you to want to be a part of the organization as a program director, and share about your role responsibilities as a program director.
Yeah. So I've been with Our Children's Place for 18 years, actually be 19 in February. So I always joke that my job is old enough, can vote, right? Yeah. And so I actually joined Our Children's Place as a program director or as the executive director at the time when we were a standalone nonprofit. And I had been working with a domestic violence agency here in Chapel Hill, did that, took a break, and then had an opportunity to interview for the position with Our Children's Place. And at first I thought, wow, I'm not sure that's the path I want to go down. At the time, the focus was on creating a residential program for women who were incarcerated and pregnant. And so they would be able to stay through their pregnancy, and then once they gave birth, they could stay with their children in a facility that was off-site. So they would still be incarcerated, but they'd have an alternative location for their incarceration. So I came on board initially as an interim, and as the board told me at the time, you're gonna love it, you're gonna wanna stay. And they were right, I did, I stayed. And we worked on that for a bit, and because of funding, that piece of it went away, but then we joined Coastal Horizons almost 10 years ago and became a program within their Justice Services Department. So our focus has been from the beginning and continues to be how do communities support children who have an incarcerated or returning parent. So thinking about children whose parents were arrested, maybe went to jail as a result of that, possibly onto prison, and then are being released. And that can mean coming back to live with the child, living somewhere else temporarily, and then going to live with the child. So thinking about how communities can offer support to kids around that. this was not an intended career path. I wasn't like a fourth grader who woke up and said, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a teacher, or I want to be. This actually just came about through some amazing opportunities through my career where I was able to work with crime victims and really learn that there's another part of the conversation that we oftentimes don't think about, that kids feel the impacts and suffer the consequences of actions that are not their own, that the adults commit, but that sometimes they get overlooked in the conversation. And so I have been able to just build on past experiences in this role with our Children's Place.
Wow. So talk about your role as the program director as well. So what exactly do you do?
Yeah, so I spend a good part of my time doing training for professionals across the state. So we are based in Durham, Coastal Horizons is based in Wilmington. We do work statewide, and we've been statewide in focus since the beginning. So I do work with social workers, after-school providers, teachers in school settings, anyone who's supporting a child, any adult, whether that's an after-school provider, Department of Social Services, to encourage them to think about how they can create that village that supports children. So if there's a conference coming up, I usually submit a proposal, and then oftentimes what will happen is people say, hey, I heard you at this conference, will you come and do a session for everyone in our school district, or everyone within our DSS, or everyone within our after-school program? So we do a lot around workshops, but then also providing follow-up resources. So if someone attends a workshop and they say, gosh, I'm actually working with younger children, do you have some good resources? Or I'm actually working with teenagers and what you provided seems a little bit young, could you provide something a little bit older for them? The other piece of what we do, which is a smaller piece, but I think the one that catches people's attention, is that we do some limited programming within prisons. So we do Parent Day, we have 6 of them scheduled for the fall. Those are longer visits, usually 4 hours, where kids come in and they get to spend that time with their incarcerated parent. We bring in lunch, they do arts and crafts, we have a photographer to do family pictures, a ton of board games. We can't have anything with electronics, so we can't have something, there are no iPads, there's nothing with a plug or a switch. So everything low tech we bring in. We have a book display, so kids can pick out books and read with their parents. And we really create an atmosphere where families get to decide how they're going to spend that time. In many cases, the parents are close to being released, so it's also a chance to think about, what is it going to look like when I leave? What's the relationship with my child going to be like? How are we going to spend time together? What is that going to look like? So those are really the two pieces, the professional education and then the programming that's happening within some of our prisons.
So, okay, so some of your prisons.
Right.
So not all prisons allow that.
So we'll be in 5 in the fall, and there are something like, I think, 53 or so prisons in the state. So obviously we're still in a very small number of them. We have probably 4 other prisons that we've been talking to and sending information and meeting with that I'd like to think eventually will say, yeah, this is something that we would like to do. And then there are quite a few prisons that we've just never had conversations with, and we may at some point, but right now our focus has been on that core group that have been doing it now, in several cases have been doing it for probably 10 or 12 years.
So the mission for our Children's Place seems to be very genuine. Have you had any prisons give you any pushback as to not wanting your program? And why would they not?
Yeah, so not so much, I wouldn't say pushback. I think there is that natural hesitation to say, how do we address safety and security? That's our number one concern. And now you're talking about bringing in glitter glue and board games and a whole bunch of kids at one time. I just think their radar goes up around, ooh, do we want to make that happen? So we've done a lot of education. We have in our materials we prepare and send to them, we have references. So I know that I can talk to a warden who may or may not be convinced to do this, but if they hear from another warden, there's a much better chance they're going to say, oh, yeah, we'll at least think about it, because they can talk to the warden about, were there any problems, did anything happen, what should I know about it? So it's been more just, again, I don't think so much pushback, just a little bit of reluctance of what is that going to look like, how do we make that happen? Because we've been doing it for about a dozen or so years, we have a track record that I can say, this is what we've learned, here are the changes we've made. We're very transparent. They get a list of everything we're going to bring in. They get a list of all the volunteers we're bringing in. So there's nothing we're trying to sneak in or hide. We don't want to do that. We want it to be successful so that we'll be invited back at that prison and other prisons down the road.
And you said it's 6 times a year?
So 5 prisons in the fall, and they usually do it twice a year.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
5
There's a lot of
prisons in the
numbers.
fall,
Yeah, yeah. So usually springtime, maybe late winter, early spring, and then usually again in the fall.
So talk about the transition from your previous employment to what you're doing now. Was that an easy transition? Was that a difficult transition?
Yeah, so I was the executive director of the domestic violence agency here in Chapel Hill in Orange County. I took a little bit of a break. Some things were, I don't want to say easy, but executive director to executive director, a lot of things that are the same. For me, the biggest part, and it's the reason I first declined the job, is I said, I don't know anything about people in prison, and parents in prison. I don't know anything about it, especially moms. I don't know anything. And the response was from the headhunter or the recruiter and the board was, well, really nobody does. We're just not talking about it. So for me, the fact that I had worked as a court advocate in several different settings in a couple of different states meant that I had that I could at least say I have a working knowledge of the legal system. And I'm not a lawyer, but I've been in court. I kind of know the ins and outs from an advocacy perspective. That definitely was easy. But I remember interviewing and saying, when they asked about working for a statewide agency, that I clearly was very naive. I said, well, it just sounds like you just upscale everything, right? It can't be that much. It didn't take me long to realize that it is much different to go from a county-specific agency to a statewide agency. And that continues, I think, to be a learning curve, just to recognize that what may be happening locally may not be possible happening on a statewide basis.
And speaking of the learning curve, did you have a team that kind of helped you and massaged you through this process, or was it more so all the onus of learning this new space and delivering your objectives or your requirements as program director? Was that on you, or did you have a team to help you?
Really, we had a team. We had a board of directors at the time that were very engaged, had been involved from the very beginning, and so they just kept feeding me information. This is what we've learned. Here are the materials. Here are the people you should talk to. Repeat it over and over again. Here are the materials. Here are the people you should talk to. This is what we've learned. I was also very fortunate. They had hired a part-time program assistant, and so we joke even to this day that she was that much further ahead, just a few months, but she had learned a lot of things that she was able to pass on to me in that respect. So I do feel like early on there was a really good team. If they weren't paid staff, they were committed to this. They had a very high level of passion for it and wanted to see it happen. So they said, whatever we need to do. I mean, they went to Raleigh and testified before the General Assembly. I mean, they really did a lot of the things that a staff might do, but because we were so young at the early stages, didn't have that staff, they jumped right in to do that.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for explaining.
Yeah.
So now I just want to, hone in on the topic at hand, parental
Okay.
incarceration. So please talk about the resulting consequences of parental incarceration on children who lose a parent to the penal system for an extended period of time or forever.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you phrased it that way, because I think there is a difference between a child whose parent went to jail maybe overnight or for a few nights and then came home, and how we treat that, versus a child whose parent is facing a life sentence or even sitting on death row, and then everywhere in between around that. So I think that's important to keep in mind, and also to recognize that we can say there are certain impacts, but it really depends on the child and what was going on beforehand. I think it's much different if a child says, wow, the person who picked me up at the school bus and helped me with my homework and made dinner for me, that person has gone to prison or jail, versus the parent that I didn't know very well, I didn't see very often, sort of in and out of my life. Both have impacts, but probably a little bit different depending on the role that parent played in that child's life. And then who the supports are. Is this a family where a child says, yes, people have been upfront with me, I know where my parent is, I have people to go to ask questions, they want me to have a relationship with my parent if it's safe. Again, versus a child whose parent or family has said, we don't talk about it, we're not even going to tell you the whole situation, we don't want you to have a relationship. Again, if we look at impacts, it's going to vary depending on that level of support and type of support that children get, even within their family and within the broader community as well. But kids can feel the impacts in terms of a little bit what's going on in school, in terms of, can they talk with someone at school, does the teacher know, if that parent was very involved in their child's school life and now they're no longer a resource. the emotional impact of losing a parent in a way that's can be very different than if a parent dies or if a parent's been deployed. Oftentimes, if a parent's deployed, we tell the child, your parent is overseas, they'll be back in 3 months. Oftentimes with children who have an incarcerated parent, we don't necessarily say anything. We sort of brush it under the carpet and say they're gone or they'll be back sometime or you shouldn't worry about it. So thinking about the emotional impact, thinking about what it means for their behavior, how do they respond to what's going on, do they act out in a certain way that may lead to some problems at school or problems with the legal system themselves, and then their relationship. You know, we forget that there is that relationship and that parent is gone and now that child has lost the person they were connected with in a number of different ways, but that person is gone and they may not know when that person's coming back, what's going to look like when they come back, if they're going to have contact with that person while the parent's incarcerated.
So speaking on incarceration levels in certain communities,
Yeah.
have you noticed that in communities with a high incarceration rate, that the school systems within those communities have somebody that's on duty to talk to and I guess provide some type of therapy to children? Do you have any statistics or any numbers on that?
So I'm going to start with that first piece first,
Okay.
about the fact is that our prison population does not reflect the population here in North Carolina or the national population, right? Like we should just be clear that the numbers don't match, which is a result of over-incarcerating certain members of our population, which then means we have more children who have an incarcerated parent within certain communities. So I think a whole nother conversation or part of this conversation, but to recognize that the statistics, it just doesn't match. I was at a prison today for a panel event. There were 10 men in that group and 2 men were white and the rest were black. That does not reflect our population, right? Like clearly we have some things broken that we end up incarcerating more people black and brown than we do white. The second part of that in terms of kids is that what I hear a lot from schools is that there isn't necessarily a person, or if there is, it's the social worker who is responsible for a whole group of children and in fact may be scheduled to be at several different schools. So when we talk to a school group, I always encourage them to think about, again, that village approach. Who are the others in the school who could be part of that support? So it could be the social worker at times, but if the social worker is at a different school or tied up with a student, or if that child doesn't have a great relationship with the social worker, who are the other people who could be available? And really encouraging schools and all of us to broaden the conversation. It may be the bus driver who has the best relationship with that child because the bus driver is picking up a child and recognizing, oh, there's somebody different there dropping the child off, or the child makes a comment about mom's not here to be part of this. And so really saying who at the school can be part of their support, not saying it has to be a particular person. Oftentimes what we hear from schools is they don't necessarily know, or they hear through the grapevine, or someone saw something online, they saw a mugshot of a parent, but there isn't necessarily a way that they know specifically that it's these 4 students with their parent who's incarcerated. They find out several different ways. And so one of the things that we encourage schools to do is think about creating a safe environment where families would feel comfortable sharing that with what's going on and knowing there aren't going to be consequences or they're not going to be judged, they're not going to be looked down upon because they have that incarcerated parent. Long answer, short answer is I would say for many schools they don't have a person that has this knowledge, is trained, and would be a go-to for a particular student.
That's very interesting because most job applications, they ask, like, have you been in jail?
Right.
So schools don't ask families that are attending if, I guess, the parents have, I guess not.
Yeah, from what I've learned, it depends on the particular school, that it varies, and that sometimes they'll ask in general, where is the other parent, but may not ask specifically, is that person incarcerated? And then I think if they do ask, that may be where the conversation ends, that there's not necessarily a conversation about how do we support the student who has an incarcerated parent, what does the student know, who's provide that information, and how do we keep that incarcerated parent engaged in their child's school life if it's safe and appropriate, as opposed to saying, well, you're gone, you're in jail, you're in prison, you're no longer part of that child's life. Instead saying, if it's safe and appropriate, how do we keep you engaged as a parent so you know what's going on in your child's school life?
So like mailing a report card
and getting them involved in parent-teacher conferences or IEP meetings. If a parent, if schools send off a newsletter once a month and they email it or hard copy it to families, figure out a way to get that to the incarcerated parents so that they can stay engaged in their child's school life. Otherwise, most folks incarcerated don't have access to the internet, so they can't find out that information. They're going to rely on families, or in those cases, schools, to provide that type of information.
Wow. So with working with parents and working with children, this is probably not a straightforward answer, but have you noticed if children are more receptive to help in a group setting or versus individual? Does that make sense?
It does. And we haven't done a lot of that, so I'm going to answer that based on what others have shared. Again, a lot of times it depends on the particular child and what they know and who else knows what's going on. I remember having an elementary school teacher who said to me, we talked about doing a support group at the school for children and then realized that kids weren't going to come to that because everybody knew that at 2 o'clock in Mrs. White's office, that's where those kids went. And they said the stigma was too much. So I remember one particular teacher or social worker saying she would just invite kids to her office to have lunch together, just as a group, and not make a huge announcement about it. So I think that's part of our job as a community, is to check in with families and say, do you think your child or the children you're caring for, do you think it would be helpful for them to have someone to talk with one-on-one? Would it be helpful to have them be part of a group setting? Maybe even a little bit of both. Maybe it's a one-on-one, but also a group. I also think about older kids, so pre-teen and teen kids. My guess is being together in a group might be a better arrangement because then they can talk about lots of other things happening, not just about having an incarcerated parent. But I think our job as a community is to say, what makes the most sense in this particular setting for this particular child, so they feel like the support that they need, again, individual or as part of a group.
So I know that you said that there are a lot of factors that play a role in a child emotionally getting over that hump that my parent is incarcerated. Right. But I do want to ask, have you noticed a difference in how a child is receptive to that information based off of race? So have you noticed, like, what I'm trying to get across is, the topic of resiliency.
Right.
Why are some kids, I mean, you kind of answered that. I just want to know if it plays a role into the race of the child. But why are some kids more resilient with the emotional fact that I might not ever see my parent again, physically, emotionally? I don't know, does that?
Yeah, so I think I understand. Let me answer and see if that's what you're thinking. So I think, unfortunately, in a lot of Black and brown communities, there are a lot of incarcerated parents or people, and so it may seem like it's just not a big deal, right? Because it happens to everybody. I've had someone say to me, well, everybody in my 5th grade class had an incarcerated parent, so it wasn't a big deal. And my argument would be, it could happen to everyone, and it can still be a big deal to you personally. I think about Western North Carolina. Got slammed almost a year ago with the hurricane. And so lots and lots of people said, it impacted me as a group. Neighborhoods, towns, whole regions were devastated, and yet it still impacted me personally. And I think we sometimes forget that even if it's happening to a whole group of folks, it can still have an impact on me personally. That might be the same or much different than my neighbor, even though we experienced the same thing.
Because it's new to that person.
It's new to that person, and I wasn't prepared for it, and I don't know what to do. And my relationship with my dad is different than my neighbor's relationship with his dad, even though both dads are incarcerated, right? That's just that's the difference between people. And so I get worried when we say that because it impacted a whole group, it can't possibly also impact people individually. And I think that may factor in. I'm not qualified to talk about race and resiliency, but I think when we look at where it's impacting large parts of the population, I think it may look and feel different than if you, like, I remember some woman saying to me, those are great books you have, but where are the books for the white kids whose parents went to prison? I wasn't even sure how to respond to that. But this feeling that there's just an expectation around resiliency because of it's happened so much in one community versus it doesn't happen in another community, and so it might have more of an impact.
Makes sense. No,
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
okay.
that makes sense. It makes sense. Oh, were you going to say something?
No.
Have you noticed when a parent is reincarcerated, have you noticed that some children, I guess, get kind of numb to that, or do they kind of get worse? What's your findings on that?
Yeah, so and it's actually an example I'll use when we talk about when parents come home, that's the end of the incarceration. It doesn't necessarily mean the end of the impacts. So for some kids, they'll tell you, my mom came home 2 weeks ago, she was in jail. I'll say that's a statement of fact for some kids. My mom came home from jail 2 weeks ago, but I'm a child who's watched my parent cycle in and out. And so I'm waiting. Is it going to happen again? How long will she be home this time? How long will she be gone next time? Who's going to take care of me? So I do think that the more times you see kids or parents cycle in and out, sort of that cumulative effect for kids about, does it mean they don't love me? Like, why do you keep going back to that behavior? Why do you keep doing things that put you back? What does that say about me? Wondering about the trust. You say you're home, you say this is the end, you say you're staying out, and yet you're going back. Questioning the system, even though they may not say it, sort of like, why do people keep picking on my parent, right? My parent was just trying to do the right thing. Why do they keep putting them back in jail or prison? And I would say for some kids, possibly even just giving up and saying, like, why bother? You keep leaving me and coming back, and we have to start all over again. It just takes a lot of energy. Why should I even think about doing that going forward? So I think when we talk about reentry and recidivism, those aren't just numbers. Those are impacts on people for whom this is happening, but also the trickle down for their kids if in fact people are going back to jail and prison. I always say the way to have fewer incarcerated children of incarcerated parents is just to have fewer incarcerated parents, right? It has nothing to do with the kids. It has to do with we have fewer people in jail or prison than you have less children who have a parent in jail or prison. So thinking about it from that perspective.
And I would also assume that probably the child loses trust in law enforcement as well.
Right.
They probably grow to hate them.
Yeah, because those are the people who keep coming. My dad keeps getting arrested. The people keep coming back. You say you're here to help me, but you keep coming back. You keep arresting, and so a distrust of the system or belief that the system is not there to help, and therefore isn't a resource for them as a child either. So thinking about it from that perspective.
So still talking about correctional control out of prison as well, specifically parole and parole, I forgot the other.
Probation.
Probation.
Right.
Thank you very much. How does that have a consequence or an effect on children?
Yeah.
If it does.
It most definitely can. I think about kids that maybe weren't told, hey, your mom's coming home from prison at the end of this month, and kids assume, well, that's the end of it. My mom's going to be home. We're done. And encouraging families to think about, has anyone explained that she's going to have a probation officer and there are certain things that she can and can't do? So thinking about the continued control, as you said, correctional control, but also what does it mean that now suddenly my parent is home or I'm back, the parent's back and we are reestablishing a relationship, but maybe my parent has promised certain things. When I come home, I'm going to buy you this, we're going to do this, we're going to go these places. And now my parent is having a hard time finding a job. And so they actually can't buy those things, or they have restrictions about where they can go and who they can spend time with. And so those aren't, it comes down to that's what the parent has to do. It trickles down to the kids, but it can also be looked at as the control continues, that my parent might be home and wearing civilian clothing, but they're still having to respond to certain things and some of those rules and conditions might seem a little squishy, or as a child, I don't really understand them, and it just seems like it's never ending, right? That the control is continuing and that other people are still inserted in our lives and we don't have any control over that piece of it.
So I know that a part of your mission is nurturing the relationship between parent and the child.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Do you do that outside of the prison as well, or is it just inside?
So the Parent Day has definitely been a small part of that. It's definitely a time-limited experience, but it is focused on, in some cases, starting the conversation, that maybe it's been a while since the child's visited, or like I said, sometimes the parent is close to being released, so it's thinking about what is that relationship going to look like going forward. We do have a program that's been in a couple of prisons and is now exclusively at the women's prison in Anson County that is a 12-session parenting class, visits for families, individual case management, to really think about, I think in many cases, repairing that relationship and thinking about what that's going to look like going forward. So those are all women. Their class started today. In fact, there are 24 in that class. And they, some will be getting out soon, some have a bit longer in their sentence, but the parenting program, the parenting class, is specifically designed for parents who are involved in the justice system. So incarcerated, they've been out in the community, but they've had that. And so oftentimes that particular program is looking at relationships, the potential damage, what we've learned from parenting about how we were parented, decisions about what we're telling our children, how we're going to reestablish relationships. So it's really focused specifically on the incarcerated parent. So it's not just a parenting program for any parent, it's those that in many cases don't have a chance to practice their parenting skills because they don't see their children on a regular basis. If I took a parenting class in the community right now, I could go home and practice. You can't do that if you're incarcerated. So trying to be creative and thinking about how do you practice that on a phone call or a short video visit, or if you do have that in-person visit with your child.
So talk a little bit about reestablishing that connection. So what goes into that?
Yeah, so so just talking about this particular program called Fresh, so that's separate from Parent Day. So in some cases, it's been encouraging the parents to share with their families they're taking this parenting class, to say, you know something, maybe I haven't been doing a great job, and I'm taking this parenting class, and this is what I've learned, and this is what's going to entail, and when I finish, I'll have a certificate at the end, but also helping parents to understand that families may need some time. You may have promised lots of things before, and didn't follow through, or didn't follow through 100%, so it may take some time to reestablish that relationship. We also talk about consistency. Keep calling your kids, not stalking them, but keep calling them, keep sending them a message on the tablet, keep writing them letters, even if they don't write back. I had one father say to me, Ms. Radcliffe, I'm not going to call my kids this coming Sunday. I call them every Sunday, but I'm not going to call. I said, well, why? What happened? He said, when I called last week, I don't think they wanted to talk to me. It was a short conversation. They seemed like they were distracted, so I'm just going to skip it this week. I said, okay. So I came back the following week. He said, Miss Radcliffe, I didn't call them on Sunday. I said, so what happened? He said, I talked to my wife on Monday, and she said, why didn't you call the kids? They think you're mad at them because you didn't call. And he said, I just have to learn that when I call, they might be in the middle of something else. Something might seem more important. They're not sure how to talk to me, but I have to be consistent. I have to keep calling them and letting them know I'm still here. I haven't given up. I'm going to work on this. He said, so I'm going to call next week. So consistency, keep making contact, being honest with them, being willing to answer questions and say, I did this, this happened, this is not a wise choice on my part, here are the circumstances. We believe that kids should know the truth about where their incarcerated parent is and what happened, and really feel like it probably should be the parent who's explaining that and answering questions and sending a message to their kids that you can come tell me when things happen. Even if bad things happen, or even if you made a mistake, you can come tell me, and I'm going to be honest with you. I hope that you're going to be honest with me. And again, being patient and being consistent and telling kids you love them, even if they're not willing to tell that back to you, even if they're not ready to do that, and giving them some time, and saying, just because you're out doesn't mean you're going to go right back to being dad or creating a new system or relationship with them. They might need some time to see whether you're really going to stay out, what choices you're going to make, what people you're going to hang around with, that it may not happen right away. I've heard from a number of parents, in particular fathers, who said, I just had to back up a bit and say, I'm here, and when you're ready, I'm still going to be here for you, but I'm not going to push to kind of get that relationship back on track.
So do you trust, as you and your organization, do you trust these incarcerated parents to be forthcoming with that information to their children, to their families? Or do you help to kind of nurture that interaction, like maybe have a space similar to this, and the incarcerated parent, their family, and you're sitting there as if like a stand-in therapist? Or is it more so you handle your business and you get back with me, or let's do this together? Like what avenue is that?
Yeah, it's been more sort of option C. So we, so we don't necessarily sit down, a three-way, but we have some really good resources that we'll say to parents, here's some things to get you started. Here are some printed materials that have been put together by folks with lived experience to talk about telling a child the truth. So I'm going to give this to you. You can decide what you think makes the most sense for you and your family. If you need some help, if you want to role play it, that's great. If you feel like that's going to be okay. At Parent Day, I think because it's 4 hours and because the kids are there without any caregivers, so these are all male facilities that we've been at, so there's no moms, no grandmoms, kids are there. And so there are some honest conversations because there's nobody, it's the child and their parent. So the child can ask straight out, what did you do, why you're here, much longer you're going to be here. There's no caregiver to kind of jump in and say, well, we'll talk about that later, or I can answer that for you. I mean, that's what they have to do. I remember one dad in particular who sat, this is pre-pandemic, sat in the corner, a round table with his 2 daughters, and it was clear they were just very intense in their conversation. They stopped for lunch and that was it. And so afterwards, I said, I hope everything's okay. I mean, you didn't have to be involved in any activities, but I just want to check in. He said, nope, we were fine. He said, my daughters are teenagers. I get out in about 6 weeks. And so that was our conversation about what is our relationship going to look like when I leave here? When I'm back at your house, how are we going to act? What questions do you have for me? What have you been thinking about? What can I tell you as a way to prepare for that? I don't necessarily think that's happening all the time, but it did help me to understand that that is a place where those types of conversations can happen going forward, that they might not be able to do that in a 15-minute phone call or 2 hours in a very crowded visiting space where they have lots of other families. This was a time where they had an entire table to themselves in the corner and they could just talk for 4 hours about what life was going to look like in just a short period of time if he was getting out in basically a month and a half.
Wow. So in a standard, so this is outside of our children's place. So like in a standard visit, if a family member wanted to visit a parent in prison, how does that work? How does that look?
So, and I'll give you an overview because I don't work for the prison, so I can't answer all the ins and outs. But families, parents have to have their loved ones be on their approved visitation list. So they have to send them paperwork. Caregiver fills it out, sends in a birth certificate or a copy, and then they have to be approved by the prison. And there are certain restrictions about who can come in to visit, who can be on your visitation list, how many people can be on that list. But it really does put the burden on the person in prison to take care of the paperwork. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a struggle depending on the relationship they have with whoever's caring for their child. Sometimes that person says, nope, I don't want the child to visit, or I don't have time, I can't get that to work based on the prison schedule, or I'm having a hard time getting the birth certificate. So there are some potential barriers even before a visit, just making sure that's happened. And then transportation. I mean, we're a pretty wide state, and so if you have a loved one who's in a prison in the eastern part of the state and you're in the western part of the state, transportation can sometimes be an issue around, is there enough gas in my car? Are my tires okay? Do I have to take time off from work? Do I have to stop and get a snack for the kids? So another potential barrier is just the logistics, the transportation piece. And then what our visiting spaces look like in terms of, is it a friendly environment? This FRESH program that I mentioned that has us doing the parenting class, we also helped 13 prisons across the state redesign their visiting spaces to make them more child-friendly. So thinking about, it's never going to be home, but can we paint the walls a different color? Can we put up a mural? Can we put down some fun throw rugs? Can we have books and arts and other activities for kids to be able to spend time with their parents? Not to make it so that kids want to come back to prison, but so that they want to be there. That was a concern, like, oh, you're going to Paw Patrol it, you're going to make it too child-friendly. And someone said, you actually can't do that. But make it, again, focused on the relationship. We want that the child would feel comfortable spending time with their parent in that environment. Otherwise, who wants to sit in a hard plastic chair for 2 hours and do a visit? Most adults don't want to. Why would we expect that that would be good for a child to just sit staring at their parent like, okay, now what do we talk about for the next, hour and 59 minutes, as opposed to saying, let's sit on these cool chairs and we can sit and talk that way, or we can read a book together, or we can play a board game.
And yeah, you're 100% right. Environment,
huge. We all know that.
Definitely
right?
plays a role.
Yes.
But interesting because, Hollywood tends to promote two types of scenes or environment.
Right.
The glass window,
Right.
phone, and then also like steel or metal tables in a room full of other visitors.
Right.
So you're saying it's more than that. There's more available for that.
So some of that
More
depends
than
on
that.
a prison. So Central Prison of Raleigh, which has, the folks of the highest security, is going to look much different than, say, Orange Correctional, which is here in Orange County, which is minimum custody. Folks are leaving soon. So some of the more high security ones are going to be more the Hollywood with the metal and the tables or no tables. People sit in 2 rows and they're X number of feet apart, whereas other places are having tables and maybe even some fun places to sit. So some of it is going to depend on the security or custody level of the prison as well, in terms of that. And there are maybe not as many prisons, but probably jails do that non-contact visit, so behind glass or behind plexiglass, where you're picking up the phone and you're talking, and kids can say, always say you can put your hand up against the glass, but you're actually not going to touch your parent, you're just going to be through the glass or through the plexiglass. So yes, some of that Hollywood piece is somewhat true depending on the particular setting and whether it's a jail or a prison.
And you can call a parent as many times as you want while they're incarcerated. How does that work? Do you know about that?
Yeah, so it's usually the other way, where the parent has to call the child, and they usually have to have money in their account to be able to do that. The calls are not free, and somebody on the other end has to be willing to accept a call from the prison. And that is also Hollywood-esque in terms of, they'll say, will you accept a call from?
Collection.
Yeah, and then at a certain point through the call, they'll do a little reminder, hey, you're on the call with someone from a prison, and then at the very end, they'll say this call is coming to an end. So if you're talking about a 15-minute phone call under those circumstances, and you have multiple children, even if you have 2 children, 7.5 minutes each to do that phone call, that can be tough for a child who may take a minute or 2 to warm up, then a minute or 2 to cool down at the end, and trying to do that with other kids. That's not a lot of time to have to be able to do that type of a relationship, if that's what you're restricted to, or just the phone calls.
So another point in your mission to Our Children's Place is to promote and identify practices, policies, and programs that that improve the outcomes of children of incarcerated parents. So I don't know if you talked about this in the beginning, but I just want to make sure that I talk about this. Could care to share any of the policies, programs, and practices that you guys are? Well, I know that you shared some, but if there's any others.
Yeah, for us, this is that whole thing about broadening the conversation. So instead of saying it has to be just one person, it's to think about all the systems that kids are part of, most of which they didn't choose to be part of. So, what's happening, let's say at social services? Are they allowing kids to come visit? Are they making those types of things happen? Are they including the incarcerated parent in decisions made about their children? Like, what are their policies and their practices around that? What's happening in schools, which we've talked about a bit already, in terms of who's there, who knows, how do they support? What's happening in after-school programs? So when we think about kids having access to those types of programs, who's there to help them figure that out? Can they sign up for a mentor? If you have a family where they've lost half their income because you now have an incarcerated parent, are there some funding opportunities for kids to be able to access that? And then thinking about the prison system, even in terms of what we talked about, access to phone calls, more child-friendly visiting environment, how staff is trained. So looking at not just a particular policy, but all of them, and saying, could they be modified to make sure that we're including children of incarcerated parents and their parents in these conversations? So parent-teacher conferences. Are we thinking about how to do that with an incarcerated parent? I would say most people are not. It can be done. We have someone who did 2 parent-teacher conferences last school year with an incarcerated father, and kind of what it took to make that happen. Well, just think about what it means in that particular scenario. So now you have a young child who knows that her dad talked to her teacher, right? And for so many kids, they want that, right? This is a kindergartner. I want my parents to meet my teacher. These are two very important people in my life. I want them to know each other. You now have a mother who knows that she's not necessarily parenting alone because she has the incarcerated parent. And you have a teacher who said, wow, it was super helpful to learn from the dad, his perspective on his child and how she learns and how I can support her going to the next level. And I think it sends a message to prisons that this isn't just an inmate or an offender or a prisoner or even just not a man. This was a father who chose to be engaged and involved in his child's school life and what that means in terms of him going forward and how he's looked at or respected or treated in his role as parent. So again, if we think about a particular policy, but how we put that in practice, I think helps us to broaden that conversation and say we could all play a role in supporting that particular child, not just one person in one particular setting.
Thank you for that. I don't know if you can answer this, but
Okay.
came to mind. Are parents who are incarcerated, are they awarded or awarded might not be the best term, but I'm going to use it.
Okay.
Are they awarded if they show that they are seriously involved or seriously trying to be involved in their children's lives? Like a parent who might be in jail for or incarcerated for 5 years, and they make every single parent-teacher conference. They make sure that they stay in touch with their child. Like, is that type of attitude towards family outside of the bars, is that awarded? Like, oh wow, you're trying to be involved with your child, you're trying to be a father figure or a mother figure in your child's life. We might shave off a couple of years. I don't know if that's a thing.
So as far as I know, it's not going to have an impact on their sentence.
On their sentence.
Where it may have, hopefully, a positive impact is if social services is involved.
Okay.
And they say, as part of your plan, if you're going to reconnect with your child, once you get out, you need to take a parenting class or earn a GED or anger management, that those are the types of things that they're going to be able to check the box and say, I did these things. And so when it comes back to court, they can say to the judge, I was told I had to do these things, or even if I wasn't told, I did. I took a parenting class, or I enrolled in this particular program, or I took this particular training so that I have more skills to be able to have a good paying job, legal job when I leave here to be able to support my child. Part of that is not all children who have an incarcerated parent are involved with the Department of Social Services. It's actually a very small percentage who are involved as a result of parental incarceration. So it might just be that it's another parent or grandparents or someone else caring for the child, and there's no DSS involvement, in which case taking a parenting class is because that's what you need to do, not because it's part of your DSS plan is that you have to take that parenting class.
And DSS stands for?
Department or Division of Social Services. So it's the child welfare folks. It's the folks that oftentimes people are nervous about getting involved because they think their children are going to be taken from them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So also talk about spatial concentration, or what you know about spatial concentration concerning parental incarceration. So of course not every single child in a community has a parent in jail or in prison, but they might have a friend who has a parent that's incarcerated, multiple friends. Have you seen how those interactions, those relationships affect the child and how they grow up and how they see the world? It's very easy to be influenced.
Right. So you mean the child who doesn't have the incarcerated parent?
Yes.
Yeah. I haven't seen, that's a good question. I don't think I've seen much research on that. I do know we bring it up as if people say, well, I don't know a child with an incarcerated parent, I'm not sure I need to pay attention to what you're saying, is I'll say, but how do we help other kids be good friends? Because it may be that Sesame Street has some amazing resources with Muppets, obviously, and that's one of them. They have a video where you are introduced to a Muppet whose dad is in jail, but his friends are there. And it's clear that the support, the focus of the video is about him, but it's also the friends just don't know what to do. This is news to them. that are not from, obviously they're Muppets, so they're younger. This is news, they don't know what to do with it, and they want to know how to support him in this particular role. It doesn't go on to say what it means for them, but I do think it's important for us to think about not only kids, but how do we help kids be good friends so that they're not making their own assumptions, or they're not saying, well, I don't want to be friends with you anymore, but also feeling like, well, I don't know what to do in this. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to talk about this. But I also think the adults factor in, right? We know that some kids are told, you can't go play with little Johnny anymore because, well, little Johnny's dad is in jail, right? As if it was contagious. And so therefore, it's going to happen to little Johnny. So I also think that part of this conversation is what the adults do with that information. So do we help the kids with the incarcerated parents, but also their friends, to help make sense of all of this and make their own decisions about how they're going to treat their friend and how they're going to go forward and what they know about the justice system and jails and prisons. So I think it's a kid conversation, but also the adults that go with that to be able to offer good, appropriate support for both the kids and their friends who are trying to be good friends.
So that's the feedback that you've been receiving from children, that people or other kids stray away from them because their parents are incarcerated, really?
Yeah, we haven't heard that so much from Parent Day, but we've heard it when we do professional workshops where adults will say, yeah, as a child, I was told that I couldn't play with certain kids, or certain kids couldn't play with me, or they couldn't come to my house because this is what happened with my parent. Again, it's not contagious, right? But there's somehow this expectation that if my child goes to a home or spends time with a child whose dad or mom was incarcerated, that somehow they're going to be incarcerated as well. So thinking about, again, I always say that kids have it right. It's the adults who screw it up, right? So thinking about what the adults can do to offset that part of it. Obviously with an eye towards safety, right? I'm not suggesting that we let a child go to a home where it might be dangerous for the child. I mean, clearly not that, but assuming it's safe and appropriate, why wouldn't we want a child to spend time with other kids if that's who they want to spend time with, regardless of what happened with the incarcerated parent?
Wow. I didn't think that was a thing.
Yeah. And it's just, so now you have a child who's lost potentially someone who's very important to them, maybe wondering what's going on, and then finding out, oh, my best friend can't come to the house anymore, was told they can't spend time with me anymore because of something, not that I did, but something that my parent did. I have absolutely no control over, but clearly I'm feeling the impacts of that. So one of your earlier questions was about impacts, and think about what I lose as a result of my parent going to jail or prison. My parent, that relationship, but other relationships, what this might mean for me as well.
And that's probably why parents are not forthcoming with that information when they move into a school district.
Right. People say, well, families don't share that information. Well, they may have shared in the past and got such a lousy response, such a judgmental response, that they may be hesitant to tell you again. We've all been in that situation where you told someone something that was difficult or uncomfortable and you got a lousy response. You're like, okay, I'm just not going to tell anyone else, right? Because I'm not going to run the risk of that happening again. That was hurtful. It made me feel horrible. I'm just not going to share that with anyone else.
Wow. So what do you know about the intergenerational effects of parental incarceration? So a child of a parent, they have a child. That grandchild, how is their life paved for them, like mentally, physically?
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite questions and one of my least favorite questions, and I'll tell you why. So there is a national campaign called See Us, Support Us that happens in October, and it happens year-round, but October is sort of the capstone for it. And last October, the focus was all about stigma and misinformation. And as part of that, I had a chance to go to Phoenix in April and present at a national conference. And there were, I can't tell you how many youth. So we're talking probably end of high school into early college, that age range, who repeatedly said they wanted us to stop talking about intergenerational cycles of incarceration, because they said, we're here and we're not in prison. So by you saying that, and they're saying to the community as a whole, you are suggesting that we are destined to follow in our parents' footsteps. And we're not. We're here. We're at a conference. We're in front of you. We're not. They said, and this has been conversation with other advocates, let's talk about intergenerational cycles of just incarceration, So not necessarily parental, just, we've seen that I'm not destined to follow my parents' footsteps, but I may have seen other generations, or that I see someone go to jail or prison more than once. But also intergenerational cycles of poverty, of racism, of poor education systems. Like, those are the types of systems that oftentimes lead to people being incarcerated. But they really were very clear that they wanted us to think about that, and not that somehow they're destined to follow in their parents' footsteps. And I can see that, resources are limited. So if you have a choice between a child in a school setting or after school or anywhere else, and you have X number of resources spent on that child or a child with an incarcerated parent, and we make an assumption that child with an incarcerated parent is going to follow in their parents' footsteps, then we're going to say, well, let's focus our resources on this, as opposed to saying, hey, you're two amazing kids and we're going to help you figure this out. And by the way, you have an incarcerated parent, right? And that's really has been our philosophy, is we're not into patting kids on the head and saying, oh, poor Johnny, your dad's incarcerated. It's more like, you're an amazing kid. How do we as a community help you be more amazing? And your parent is incarcerated, right? As opposed to saying, you're destined to do that. That being said, you could go to any prison across the state right now, and I bet anyone in that prison who works at prison will say they have seen more than one generation. Maybe at that prison, or maybe they've been working in the prison system a long time, and they'll say, I have someone right now, but I was at a different prison, and his father was there. So it is definitely, I'm going to say it's not happening, but to focus more on other systemic things that are happening leading to that, as opposed to saying, kind of like, you're destined to follow in your parents' footsteps. And anytime I hear of someone who's in prison who says, my son graduated from college, high honors, playing football in college, I'd be like, that, your kid's a mythbuster. They're everything else and a mythbuster, right? They've shown the world that just because you were in jail or prison doesn't mean that they were destined to follow in their footsteps.
And the solution is to treat all kids the same, regardless of their background.
Right.
Now, don't give anybody special treatment.
Or treat them all differently because they're all different kids, but not to say, well, you're not deserving of this, or somehow we have to feel sorry for you. It's like, no, we're going to provide the same resources depending on your particular needs, and acknowledge the fact that you have an incarcerated parent, but not have that be the start of the conversation, right? Like, oh, you have a parent in prison? It's like, oh, let me tell you all the other things you're doing, and you have a parent who's in prison.
So do you follow, like, once these parents are released, do you follow them for an extended period of time after they leave prison?
So this is the theme. This is one of these two-part answers, or answer A and answer B. So in this FRESH program that we have at some of the prisons, we follow them for up to 6 months. And that's entirely up to them. We don't require, but that's 6 months. Once they finish the program, we follow them until they leave prison, and then we can stay in touch for up to 6 months afterwards. So we check in every couple of weeks, more if they're interested. How are they doing? What do they need in terms of a job? Do they have a place to live? That sort of thing. Some people, they want to stay in touch. They'll text, every 2 weeks. Others say, nope, I'm good. I'll let you know if I need anything. For Parent Day, we will follow and provide follow-up if that's something they express, but we don't necessarily follow. That's not part of how Parent Day is set up. The downside is that it means we don't have any long-term information to say, we know that 92% of kids graduate from high school, or 87% went on to the next grade. We don't have that information. We've started some initial conversations about what that might look like, but it really is a very time-limited opportunity. That being said, we have seen several families where they've participated more than once. I'm thinking about one dad whose a couple of his kids were too young to participate, but then as they got older, they could participate. And I have some mixed feelings about that. It was great that they could come back, but it is a little bit sad to think that you're watching kids grow up and their parents are incarcerated, right? It wasn't just, you came once, now your parent's been released. This is, your parents have been in prison long enough that I've watched kids be old enough to participate in Parent Day. It just makes me a little bit sad to think about, kind of that long-term, how long the parent has been gone in those types of situations.
So for the FRESH program, when you're keeping tabs on them, or when you're staying in touch, I should say, are you just more so tracking information? Like, do you have a job? What's your financial status? Or are you helping them find a job? Like, do you have organizations that you can put them into contact? Okay.
Yeah, so, and it varies tremendously. Like some are just, hey, Miss Radcliffe, just want to check in. How are you doing? I'm doing fine. Others will say, wow, I'm struggling with. And so I'll say, okay, so you're in this part of the state. Here are the folks that are in that part of the state that are doing housing. Here's a phone number. Here's an email. Here's a name. I've already talked to the person. They're expecting your call. Make a connection. Others are, they need some support. I've been out for a few months. I thought things were going okay, but I'm struggling a bit. Do you just have a time, a chance to talk? I'm having some problems connecting with my older daughter. I'm not sure what to do. So it really depends on the particular situation and where they are. I mean, when they first get out, it might be like, here's my laundry list of things I need. As it gets closer to the end of that 6 months, it might be, I just want to check in to let you know I'm doing okay. I got a promotion. I'm now working days instead of nights, whatever the case might be.
And they contact you directly?
They do. So I have a group of folks that I stay in touch with, and then we have a care manager who's at the prison, Anson Women's Prison, and so they contact her directly.
Wow. And you said the FRESH program is 10 people?
So FRESH stands for Family Reentry Support and Help, and so she is in touch with lots of the women that have graduated from the program. I've been in touch with the men who were in some of the other prisons. So at this point, there are probably, 6 or so that I stay in touch with. There have been more that have completed, but for whatever reason, they just didn't want to stay in touch, and we don't force them. I mean, that's entirely up to them if they want to stay in touch going forward.
Okay, thank you. So what do you know about parental incarceration and it overlapping with the foster care system or foster care involvement?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in children of incarcerated parents either, but I'm not an expert in foster care, but clearly those are some systems that can be paralleled sometimes, can intersect at sometimes, and I think there are some systems that we can learn from each other in terms of kids and their parents are separated, not of a choosing, they didn't choose that, right? Neither side chose that. They're separated, and there can be conversation about whether they're ever going to come back, right? It might be that a child's in a foster care situation just for a limited time, parent is released from prison, they reconnect, the parent's done what they need to do, but it may also be that a child's in a foster care situation and that's going to lead to parental rights being terminated, in which case they're not going to have that connection. So I think we can learn kind of how do we encourage families to stay in touch if it's safe and appropriate, what does that look like? I think it's also a recognition that the foster care system and the prison system oftentimes have a bad reputation. I think probably well-deserved in sometimes, but also not recognizing that there are some glimmers of hope. There are some good things happening that maybe we could be doing more of in those particular systems. But I think the biggest thing is that kids didn't choose to be involved in either one of those and are oftentimes kind of moved around, or decisions are made without them being considered, even older children. That it's always the adults know best, and I'm going to guess many times we do, but I'm not sure we oftentimes check in with kids to say, what questions do you have for us? What do you want us to know? What information could you provide that might be helpful in this particular situation?
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, do you have any lasting comments that you would like to leave with the audience, or I know you brought notes.
I always have notes, right? It makes me feel better to have notes.
No,
I just want to point out, I mentioned about this national campaign that happens in October.
Please,
It's the CS Support Us campaign. It's been going on for a number of years. This year they're focusing on the Bill of Rights, which is actually on our website, and I think a pretty cool document. It's not legal. You can't be held accountable if you don't follow it, but it was designed by youth with lived experience who talk about some of the things that we've talked about, that they have the right to know what's going on. They have a right to a relationship. They have a right not to be judged, labeled, or shamed. And so this year it's going to be looking at the 20th anniversary, how or if that's being implemented across the various states and what we can do about it. So I think the Bill of Rights is, like I said, a cool document, but there's also a lot of detailed information that goes into it that I think all of us individually and as part of groups could look at that and say, oh, right, There are, I think, 8 rights. Our group can't do 8 of them, but we could pick one of them and say, that's our thing. That's the thing that we focus on to help achieve that, both the right and then all the backup that goes with it. So I just encourage folks to to follow that campaign in October and to think about their role in making sure that kids have access to their parents, access to information, access to support in October, but also throughout the other 11 months in the year.
And you brought up a good point. What can we do, the viewers listening, myself, my team, what could we do to help Our Children's Place and just help bring awareness to this topic in general?
So, the standard is go to social media, go to our website, all of that, but also just ask some questions in your community, being able to say, what is going in our school system? What's happening with our county Department of Social Services? What's our after school programs doing? Like looking at the adults in a child's life and saying, not being nosy or being disrespectful, but just saying, hey, I listened to this podcast. Let's talk about this in our community. What's happening? How do we build on that? What's not happening that we could start something new to make sure that we're supporting kids in this particular situation?
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure meeting you in person and having this conversation. The work that you're doing with Our Children's Place is necessary and it's great. And I know that you said that the Parent Day at least is at 5 prisons right now.
Yes.
I hope it continues to expand because it's a great concept. I would find it weird that, I understand the security aspect, but the concept and the purpose behind it is powerful. And like you said, it helps that transition process run a lot more smoothly.
Yeah.
Please, you said that you're on your 19th year.
Yes, it'll be 19 in February.
Any plans of stopping, or you're still going?
I consider myself so fortunate. I love my job.
Awesome.
Some days I don't like parts of it, but I love my job. There's still some work that we need to do. And so I figure the day I don't like my job is the day I'll stop. But right now, as long as they'll keep me, I will stay.
Well, yes. Well,
yeah.
In those 19 years, without you listing all of your accolades, I can just tell by your enthusiasm and everything that you have to say today that you're passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
So I hope that you continue to keep going and keep that fire within you and impact as many families and children as possible.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your work. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.